In celebration of Black History Month, I will be sharing some history to highlight some of the adversities and inequalities Black and brown people has faced, but most importantly, the unassailable way that Black and brown people have resiliently persevered even when troops aren't being told. If all history is being taught in schools, then I would have learned about Black Wall Street and the Tulsa race riots in 1921, or the near 26 cities that witnessed the same fate 2 years prior in 1919, such as Chicago, San Francisco, Wilmington, and Elaine, Arkansas, to name a few. Maybe even Seneca Village, now known as Central Park. None of this was taught to me in school. However, these riots happened while my great-grandparents were still around. Let's fast forward to the 1950s and the 60s, when my grandparents was around my age during the Civil Rights Movement, almost 100 years after slavery had ended. I recall my grandparents sharing stories of how times were during segregation. Let us never forget that the Civil Rights Movement ended with the death of Dr. King, someone who preached and taught peace, and yet we pushed on. I'm not even going to talk about mass incarceration or redlining, police brutality, school-to-prison pipeline, or the war on drugs. Not going to get into that today. But to keep the story going, this was around the time my parents was growing up, and during the time many of the people in this room were growing up. However, for there to be a conversation around race, it will behoove us, if we are not first all informed, in universal truths. Let's continue to the 2000s. And yes, I grew up in the 2000s. It's undeniable that my generation has seen some of the ugly truths in our country and here in our Commonwealth. We have seen proof of injustices time and time again. What has led me to the world of politics is my love for activism and social justice. Even I have dealt with police brutality. I have marched for social justice all around the Commonwealth, and I have seen and experienced firsthand the fear and terror of being tear gassed, maced, and pursued by the police. After the police incited their own riot right here in Richmond a few years ago during a peaceful protest, when I say the names of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, Marcus David Peters, Stephen Clark, Donovan Lynch, Philando Castile, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin, and the list goes on. Most of them were younger than myself, and a couple were right here from the Commonwealth. More so, when I say their names, what I see is all of the martyrs that happen when we turn a blind eye to truths. In the system, and the truth is, the system doesn't work for everyone, and it never has. However, we have the opportunity to change this broken system, to make it fair for everyone in the Commonwealth. Even now, here in 2022, our HBCUs have come under attacks of bomb threats. Just yesterday, over a dozen HBCUs had bomb threats. What we do here will transcend to the next generation, and we must ensure that we get it right. Once we embrace truths and listen to each other to understand each other and not to always respond, when we talk about race or inclusion and yet Black and brown voices aren't at the table, as the saying goes, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired and not being felt, seen, and heard. As we celebrate Black History Month and all of the achievements that we have accomplished in spite of the odds, my prayer is that we get it right for the next generation. That Black and brown kids won't have to grow up to still feel the weight of systemic racism that has passed from generation to generation. I pray that we seek understanding and universal truths, and once we know better, we do better. It has been 169 years since slavery ended, and yet we must still have these conversations. We have taken great strides, and now we can celebrate Juneteenth, a holiday that really makes you think when you look at Juneteenth. We're not celebrating the days that the slaves were set free. That would be January 1st, 1863. We celebrate the day that the truth was finally told to all slaves that we were free on June 19th, 1865. This country has a history of hiding history. And we all have the opportunity to embrace truth and make sure the whole truth is being told. Now is the time for change. Now is the time to be unified. And now is the time to save the next generation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and happy Black History Month.